Once upon a time, in a kingdom where the mountains kissed the sky and the rivers sparkled like diamonds, there lived a princess named Snow White. She was no ordinary princess. Her beauty was beyond compare, with skin as pure as freshly fallen snow, lips as red as the ripest cherries, and hair as dark as the midnight sky. But it wasn't just her appearance that made her special. Snow White had a heart filled with kindness, always ready to help those in need and bring joy to everyone around her. Yet, despite all her goodness, Snow White lived in constant fear. Her stepmother, the queen, was a woman of great beauty but even greater vanity. She was obsessed with being the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. Every day she would stand before her magical mirror and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And every day the mirror would reply, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." This answer pleased the queen, and she would spend hours admiring herself. However, as Snow White grew older, her beauty blossomed, and one fateful day, the queen's routine was shattered. When she asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" the mirror hesitated before replying, "Snow White is the fairest of them all." The queen's heart turned as cold as ice. Enraged and jealous, she could not bear the thought of anyone, even her own stepdaughter, surpassing her in beauty. In a fit of anger, she summoned the royal huntsman to her chambers. She ordered him to take Snow White into the darkest part of the forest and do away with her. "Bring me her heart as proof," the queen commanded, her voice as sharp as a blade. The huntsman, though loyal to the queen, was deeply troubled by this command. He knew that Snow White was innocent and pure, and he couldn't bring himself to harm her. So, when he led her into the forest, he fell to his knees and confessed the queen's wicked plan. "Run, Snow White. Run far away and never return to the castle," he urged, his eyes filled with sorrow. Snow White, trembling with fear, thanked the huntsman and fled into the forest, her heart pounding with every step. The forest was dark and eerie, with towering trees that seemed to whisper and strange creatures that scurried through the underbrush. Snow White's fear grew with each passing moment, but she kept running, determined to escape her stepmother's wrath. Finally, just as she felt she could run no more, she stumbled upon a small clearing where a quaint little cottage stood, nestled among the trees like a hidden gem. Exhausted and hungry, Snow White approached the cottage and knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Curious, she gently pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was cozy but peculiar. Everything was tiny, from the chairs around the table to the beds lined up against the wall. Despite her fear, Snow White smiled at the sight. She realized that this was no ordinary cottage. It must belong to children or perhaps little people. Too tired to think any further, Snow White cleaned up the cottage, ate a small meal, and then curled up across the beds to sleep. As night fell, the true owners of the cottage returned home. They were not children, but 7 dwarfs who worked in the diamond mines deep within the mountains. Their names were Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey. As they entered their home, they were surprised to find everything clean and tidy, and even more surprised to see a beautiful young woman sleeping in their beds. Snow White awoke to find the dwarfs gathered around her, their eyes wide with curiosity. She quickly sat up and explained her story, telling them about the wicked queen and how she had fled into the forest. The dwarfs listened intently, and when she was finished, they were moved by her tale. "You can stay with us, Snow White," Doc said kindly. "We will protect you from the queen, but you must be careful. She is powerful and cunning, and she will not rest until she finds you." Grateful for their kindness, Snow White agreed to stay. She quickly became a beloved member of their little family, cooking and cleaning for them, and in return they kept her safe and happy. Every morning, the dwarfs would head off to work in the mines, and every evening, they would return to a warm meal and Snow White's bright smile. Back at the castle, the queen, believing her plan had succeeded, once again asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" To her horror, the mirror replied, "Snow White, who lives with the 7 dwarfs, is the fairest of them all." The queen's rage knew no bounds. She realized that if she wanted the title of the fairest, she would have to take matters into her own hands. Using her dark magic, the queen transformed herself into an old peddler woman, her beauty hidden beneath layers of rags and wrinkles. She brewed a potion and dipped a bright red apple into it, turning it into the deadliest of poisons. "One bite of this apple," she sneered, "and Snow White will sleep forever." Disguised and armed with the poisoned apple, the queen set off for the dwarf's cottage. When she arrived, Snow White was alone, as the dwarfs were working in the mines. The old woman knocked on the door, and Snow White, seeing a harmless old lady, opened it. "Good day, dearie," the queen croaked, holding out the apple. "Would you like to try one of my delicious apples? Just one bite will make your dreams come true." Snow White, trusting and kind-hearted, could not imagine that anyone would wish her harm. She thanked the old woman and took the apple, but the moment she bit into it, her eyes widened in shock. The apple fell from her hand as she collapsed to the floor, her body lifeless and still. The queen watched with a wicked smile as Snow White took her last breath. "Now I am the fairest of them all," she cackled before disappearing into the forest. When the dwarfs returned home, they found Snow White lying on the floor, the color drained from her cheeks, her eyes closed as if in an eternal sleep. They were devastated, their hearts breaking at the sight of their dear friend. They tried everything to wake her, but nothing worked. Realizing that she was gone, they crafted a glass coffin for her and placed it in a beautiful glade in the forest, where they could watch over her. Day and night they kept vigil, their hearts heavy with grief. But all was not lost. One day, a prince from a neighboring kingdom, who had heard tales of Snow White's beauty and kindness, arrived in the forest. When he saw her lying in the glass coffin, his heart filled with sorrow and love. He leaned down and kissed her gently on the lips, hoping against hope that it might revive her. In that moment the spell was broken. Snow White's eyes fluttered open, and she sat up, alive and well. The dwarfs, who had been watching from a distance, shouted with joy, and the animals of the forest gathered to celebrate the miracle. The prince, overjoyed to see her alive, asked Snow White to return to his kingdom with him, where she could live in peace and happiness. Snow White agreed, but only if the 7 dwarfs could come too, for they were her true family. The prince welcomed them all, and they journeyed together to his kingdom. There Snow White and the prince were married in a grand celebration, and the dwarfs were honored guests, living happily in the palace. As for the wicked queen, when she returned to her castle and asked the mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" the mirror replied, "Snow White, the fairest of them all, now lives in happiness and love far beyond your reach." The queen's fury consumed her, and in her rage, her own dark magic backfired, destroying her once and for all. And so Snow White, the prince, and the 7 dwarfs lived happily ever after, their days filled with joy, love, and laughter. This timeless tale reminds us that no matter how dark the path may seem, kindness, courage, and friendship will always light the way to a happy ending. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more magic.